Go on then, they're topical again. Over the years, TNA wrestling had its share of truly horrific moments. If I were joking around, I'd rattle off a mile-long list of crazy ideas they've done. My personal favourite being the barbed wire Christmas tree. But today, I'm talking about a genuinely difficult to watch moment from the early days of TNA. Made even more scary when you know what went wrong. The moment I'm referring to took place on the September 17th, 2003 weekly TNA pay-per-view and was part of a long and violent feud between Raven and his group known as The Gathering, which included Julio De Niro, CM Punk and Alexis Lurie, now known as Mickie James, and the Disciples of the New Church, led by Father James Mitchell. The New Church at this time included Shane Douglas, Brian Lee, Slash, Sin, who was briefly on SmackDown as Kazani, and a mystery man who'll become more relevant later. Behind the scenes, Mitchell and Raven had known each other since their days in ECW, where Mitchell worked in the latter years of the company as the Sinister Minister. For some context on their feud, the two factions would battle in all kinds of matches, first notably Raven's signature Clockwork Orange House of Fun match, where weapons would hang from the sides of the ring from a chain. At the same time, Raven was still vying to achieve his dream. The reason for him even coming to TNA, the NWA World Championship. In late August, he would defeat New Church member Shane Douglas to earn a shot against then champion AJ Styles, which would take place on August 27th, 2003. Multiple times in the match it looked like Raven might actually win, but after thwarting run-ins from Slash and Sin, a low blow from Shane Douglas, followed by a Styles clash, was enough to screw Raven out of his opportunity. A wild brawl would then erupt, with various more run-ins, while James Mitchell cackled on the stage, having achieved his goal. This brawl would lead to TNA's first version of War Games, long before Lethal Lockdown, held on the following week's event, called Wednesday Bloody Wednesday, in which Raven would team with America's Most Wanted, D'Lo Brown and Jeff Jarrett to defeat his rival Shane Douglas, AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Simon Diamond and Johnny Swinger. While Jarrett would pin Styles for the win, absolutely nothing would be resolved, as many more wrestlers would run down and create more chaos post-match. This brings us to September 17th and the hair versus hair match with Shane Douglas. This was actually the third singles match in TNA between the two, with Raven winning the first match on August 13th, and again the following week to earn the world title match with AJ Styles. The match itself, for the most part, is a slow-paced, dare I say unremarkable brawl between the two ECW veterans. Or it was, until mid-match Shane Douglas began puking in the ring, yet somehow continued wrestling. I'll be honest, I totally forgot about this until rewatching the match for this video. Another weird point in the match comes a little earlier, when Shane offers his hand with Raven's blood on it to a woman on the front row. That's not the weird part. I mean it is, but what I mean is the woman turned out to be future TNA star Angelina Love, who had already started her wrestling career the year previous, but wouldn't join the TNA roster full time until 2007, when the Knockouts division would be formed. When it looked like Raven might pin Douglas, Slash would pull the referee out, then Sin would interfere too, but both would be chased away by CM Punk and Julio De Niro. Just as it looked like the sides were even, and Raven was about to win again, the lights would go out in the TNA Asylum, and when they came back on, the mystery man I mentioned earlier was in the ring, and revealed himself to be Vampiro. Making his first appearance in TNA, Vampiro would hit Raven with a DDT, allowing Shane to get the win. Now we get to the really gruesome part, as Raven, per the stipulation, would willingly sit in a chair and allow Jim Mitchell to shave his head. Herein would lie the problem, as Mitchell would proceed to use the wrong end of the clippers, cutting into Raven's head and effectively scalping him. Initially, while Raven is wincing in pain, you might have thought he was selling, or maybe trying to convey humiliation. But when blood starts to pour down his head, it becomes clear that something has gone very wrong. The drama of the situation is elevated by Mike Tenay and Don West on commentary, showing their disgust. Don eventually throws his headset down and walks away, while Mike Tenay continues with one of his most famous lines, "I've lost my objectivity and I don't give a damn." Incidentally, how he maintained that same objectivity through some of the things in the Russo years is beyond me. In a December 2003 shoot interview with Wrestling Epicenter, Jim Mitchell explained what had actually gone wrong, noting that the clippers he was using were actually meant for shearing sheep, and in James's own words, they looked like shark teeth. The reason for this, as explained by Raven in another interview, is that due to the sweat in wrestlers' hair by the end of a match, a normal razor wouldn't have been enough, so the sheep clippers were used. This claim can maybe be backed up by another hair versus hair match that took place at SummerSlam 1998. On that night, Jeff Jarrett faced the dubious Honor, having lost to X-Pac. Post-match, X-Pac can be seen struggling to actually cut Jarrett's hair with the razor, so instead he cut lumps off his head with scissors until the segment ran long enough. According to Mitchell, he was fully prepared to take a beating from Raven, who declined to do so. While this had to be an excruciating experience for Raven, Mitchell noted that Raven seemed to at least realise that it, quote, made for great TV, and it became the catalyst for Raven in future weeks to get his full revenge, even on Mitchell. From here, this feud would get even more vicious. 2 weeks later, the Gathering would defeat Douglas, Slash and Sin in a dog collar match. Post-match though, the New Church would use the collars to attempt to hang Raven, Punk and De Niro. On October 1st the following week, Raven would vow to eliminate the New Church members one by one until only Mitchell remained. In following weeks, he would honour his word. This is where Shane Douglas would quietly disappear from the storyline, as he would begin his own mission to find a new franchise, who would turn out to be Michael Shane, cousin of Shawn Michaels, as TNA loved to remind us. Raven, however, would defeat and take out Sin on October 8th. Vampiro would try to hang Raven again, but Punk and De Niro would save him. The next week, in a rather bizarre move given that the Gathering saved him from being hung, Raven tells Punk and De Niro that he needs to complete the rest of this quest on his own. This would eventually come back to bite Raven, as the Gathering would turn on Raven in December 2003, siding with James Mitchell upon his return. On October 22nd, Raven would continue his quest by defeating Slash in a dog collar match, and then hanging him, thus taking him out too. Vampiro and Mitchell attack Raven after, but are chased away by Punk and De Niro, which Raven is clearly not happy about. On October 29th, Raven would get his final revenge on Vampiro, in a match all this hanging was building up to, the Gallows of Retribution match, where the only way to win was to hang your opponent using a noose from the top rope, which, to my knowledge, has never been done again. On the 5th of November 2003, Raven would finally get his hands on Father James Mitchell in a last man standing match. If you're familiar with the term to give someone a receipt in wrestling, that's very much what this feels like, as Mitchell takes an absolute beating from Raven, possibly in a way to make up for the scalping incident. The match would last just 5 minutes, but in it Mitchell would bleed buckets. Mercifully, the story would end here, as by this point the violence had escalated about as much as it possibly could go. TNA has had its share of violent moments and feuds, especially in the following years when Abyss would ramp things up even further. But the Raven vs New Church story in a way set the tone for how violent things could get, both planned and in real life. It's also worth noting that the vast majority of storyline beats that I've mentioned in this video are well towards the end of each TNA pay-per-view, meaning it was one of the top storylines TNA had at the time. These days, working for MLW as a manager of his latest faction, The Calling, Raven was back then one of NWA TNA's biggest stars. One of TNA's early big pay-per-views was headlined by his first shot at the NWA World Champion, Jeff Jarrett, but it would take until 2005 for for Raven to eventually capture that gold. I wonder how many still appreciate the impact Raven had back in those years, and even before then in ECW. The grunge aesthetic, the Riddle-like promos, and the young careers he had an influence on. Will we see another feud quite like his with the New Church? Nevermore. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.